So welcome everybody here in person and online as well. Hello and good afternoon to everybody, and thanks for joining us for this book launch here at British Library. So I'm Rainer Kattel. By the way, I'm a professor and deputy director at the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose at UCL. And for us, of course, British Library is a very well-known place, because when we started the institute 7-8 years ago, we had actually a couple of years, we had British Library talk series. So we used to come here quite often, pre-pandemic as it is. And so this is a well-known place for our various events and book launches. So it's not the first time, and probably not the last time either, being one of the Knowledge Quarter institutions here in London. So just before I sort of hand the floor to various people who all will talk to you, I'll do a bit of like what do we have today in store for us. So we talk about this wonderful book, Islamic Public Value, that just literally came off the presses this week, I think. So it's quite warm and it's out there from the day officially, I think. And you can buy it. You can later, if you're physically here, you can join us in the Bronte Room and actually buy the physical copy. Or if you're online, I think you can go and download it already. And of course, over the weekend, what else have you got to do but to read this wonderful, wonderful book? So, I mean, one of the main things about IIPP is that, you know, we are bringing together people around this idea of rethinking the state. And of course, there is this assumption that the state is the state is the state. But obviously, if you go around the world, there's different manifestations of the state, and particularly what forms the state, the institutions, the governance, the administration, but even more the concepts like authority, but even something like collective value. All of those things are actually quite different depending on the context you're in. And of course, we are so used to thinking of it as from a Western governance perspectives. And part of this project, and Wolfgang and Salah will talk more about this, was really about looking at alternatives to the Western dominant logics and governance practices. And of course, Wolfgang, to my left here, is really the globally leading expert in this, and I won't sort of show my ignorance more talking about it. He'll go into that in detail. But that's particularly if you look at the subtitle of the book, which is about cooperative institutions, of course, tells us there's something that we're not only perhaps talking about alternatives to Western dominant models, but also maybe more interesting substitutes in many ways, particularly perhaps from the times we're today, where a lot of the Western ways of governing seems to be collapsing around us, where a lot of that collapse is actually driven by the lack of community at the heart of politics. And of course, we know since a long time, this, you know, bowling alone and all of those metaphors that now have come home to roost, I think, in many ways for Western capitalist governance systems. And I think particularly from that perspective, I find the work that Wolfgang and Salah have been leading here particularly wonderful. And of course, all around public value and public value production, and this is what we will hear more about. So we will have from the editors and co-editors of the book, a bit of an introduction to the book, and then we have also, we hear people involved from the publishing side of things, if you will, but from Eduardo Ongaro here, and then we, after that, we have a bit of an academic, let's not say discussion, but praise for the book. No, it will be a discussion. So yes. We chose critical voices in Karen and Kerem, and I'll introduce them as the time comes. But so I'll first hand over to Wolfgang and Salah, and as I said, they are the real experts. I am the amateur in the room, and that's why I'm doing the emceeing as well, I guess. So, but over to Wolfgang. Wolfgang is a professor at Tallinn, NURCS School of Governance and Innovation, and of course also here at IIPP since the very beginning as an honorary professor, and of course also my PhD supervisor. So everything I do, right or wrong, goes back to you. But over to you, Wolfgang, for introductions.
Yes.
Oh, you have your own.
I have my own, as they say. So thank you very much for this beautiful introduction. But let me first of all say that you must be an expert both on non-Western and on Islamic PA, because otherwise you couldn't be a co-editor, right? So
there are ways.
if you edit the book, it means you're an expert, right? So thank you everybody for coming. It's always a pleasure to have a book launch, because the book writing and book editing is still something else than doing articles. And to see a book off to the public, if you will, and then in a place like the British Library that hosts the originals of one of the best books around, including, of course, Alice Underground, which is a book basically about today's global politics, although Lewis Carroll didn't know that, is particularly meaningful. We are also, as you might know, in the biggest building built in Britain in the 20th century. And it gives a certain launch pad to a project like this. Now, when doing something in the spring of 2025, the logical thing, if you want to know what this book is about, and my little role for my minutes here is, of course, to give those of you who don't know already what this book is about a short summary of what it is and tries to do. And what do you do in spring 2025? You ask a large language model what this book is about. And since the book is already online and the LLMs have access since today, it already knew. So Scholar GPT says the following. The book Islamic Public Value, edited by Wolfgang Drechsler, Salah Chafik, and Rainer Kattel, and published by Edward Elgar in 2025, is a pioneering, correct, and well-received, that's fast, scholarly work that explores the integration of Islamic principles into public administration and governance frameworks. Based on the most recent chapters and introductory material available, the book stands out for both its originality and its intellectual rigor in redefining public value through an Islamic lens, end quote. So now I can put my mobile phone away, which is not very 2025. Interesting, and as so often, partially correct, but partially Sam, you know, so close, but not quite it. The book, very briefly put, talks about specifically Islamic, indigenous, corporate governance institutions that are part of the state, that are not NGOs, but that deliver in a more 21st century approach, if you will, state services and state functions. And we have focused on the public value side of things. This is partially because we're all part of IIPP, where this is a logical thing to do, but also, as one of our authors, the great Guy Peters, has said, there is a tendency of Islamic governance to go for the lateral, the cooperative, the networky. And this is something that for people seems counterintuitive, because they expect a hierarchical obey and command structure, but that is indeed not the case, neither in theory nor in practice. And so it was something that came together not from the beginning, but as an iterative process in our project, that it became clear what we have, and then we were talking about it. And it is a public administration book. That means it is a book that in the end speaks to the public administration community. It explains. So ChatGPT thinks we are putting an Islamic element into PA. In fact, what we are showing is that Islamic public administration is real. And this is important in the context of what we call non-Western PA. Non-Western PA is the idea that what we think about general global PA is actually Western PA, and in fact not even Western PA, but Anglo-American PA, but even then American PA, to which I will get in a second of what that means. But if this is the case, if this is just one way of doing public administration, you need to look at alternatives that actually work and that are contemporary. And the most famous one is Confucian PA, this entire Chinese family. And the second one is the Islamic PA. The third one would be Buddhist PA. But What hasn't been done was to demonstrate that there are functional, specific institutions that have crystallized out from the Islamic legacy that exist today and that do help in ordering the public sphere, in structuring governance, and in delivering services. And I think if this book is successful in one thing, is that it does demonstrate that these cases actually exist. Yeah, so that we can say this is not a historical thing. This is not Ottoman Empire 1734 or Arab Sicily or something like that, but these things exist today and they are real bases for real people to operate and to cooperate that do make sense. And then from there, this is a case study heavy book, we move on to theory. Now, also as an iterative process, this book has actually more theory than we thought in the beginning, both in the beginning and in the end. The reason for that is that this project, the overall project, had an awesome advisory board of which the members were so interested in what they were doing that they actually volunteered to write an essay, to be engaged in the actual debate. And that was really great to see. We never had the idea to ask Guy Peters to write an essay about this topic. We just thought he would be good on the board and even as an advisor. And then he said, well, I'm happy to write an essay about that. And of course, very few people will say no to that. Actually, nobody in PA will say no to that. So that is the point here. Did you look at the time?
I'm looking at the time.
And?
It's fine. It's fine.
Other than the ChatGPT, what may be worth saying in the spring of 2025, what the non-Western PA community has so much been dealing with in the last months is, but can we actually talk about Western PA anymore, seeing that Western PA has been led by America, by the United States, and America has bowed out of the West. American-led Western civilization is not damaged or being damaged as we look, but it's dead. Yeah, there is nothing anymore like this there. And it's very important on this intellect. It may bounce back, but in principle, right now, we have an American government that works on delegitimizing and disabling quality PA, both on an academic level and on an administrative level. So can we talk about the West? I think very, very often the answer in PA, I think, and I'm sitting directly across Sam Webster, the editor-in-chief of Max Weber Studies, so it makes a lot of sense to mention that. Weber has the answer for you. The reason is we sometimes equate Western with liberal Western, with basically the Fukuyama idea of the end of history. Yeah? We think liberal democracy is Western. This one is gone. This one is currently gone. It's propped up by the Can states and by Europe, of course. Although with European PA, but let's not talk about the recent stories about what's happening to organized European PA. That's anyway more Eduardo's story than mine. But if we look at what we have, is what Weber, in my opinion, would actually describe as patrimonialist PA, in which loyalty is more important than expertise. And its most important, or worst, most extreme case, sultanism. That means that actually you do fire people because they're competent, because loyalty matters more. What is important in our non-Western context, however, is that Weber himself did not think that the Sultan in the Topkapi Palace was sultanic. This was a very rational administration. The Ottoman administration was highly rational, uber-Weberian, and very sophisticated. But we do have these tools. We've just forgotten talking about them. Carl Schmitt provides us with all kinds of answers. Donoso Cortés about militant Catholicism. And I'm not going to tell you what kind of German theorists 70 years ago are talking about a similar set of administrative theory. If you count back 70 years, you know what I'm talking about. But what I mean is, this is still Western if a Westernism that in principle is pre-Enlightenment. Yeah? So we do have the tools to look at that, and it is still legitimate, but more interesting than it ever was, to look at non-Western alternatives to an archaic West that partially seems to emerge. That means I would argue that the book is more, not less relevant, because the foil against which it operates is still there. And so I think this is a book for our times, sadly enough. And I'm looking forward to further discussions and various perspectives on that. And I think this is the introductory remarks I would like to make. Over to Salah.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Wolfgang. And yeah, indeed, we go over to Salah Chafik.
Yeah, I was going to say, apparently Sam, formerly Salah.
Yeah. So Salah is a senior research fellow at IIPP UCL, and also at formerly at Tallinn University School of Governance, where he got his PhD with Wolfgang, and of course very much the future of Islamic BA and governance, I think, in the making. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief. I just wanted to say a word of thanks and kind of give a bit of context about the book. So the book is part of a larger project, which is the same namesake, Islamic Public Value. That grant is funded by the John Templeton Foundation. And so for those of you that might be familiar, usually the foundation is interested in kind of the intersection of science and religion, doesn't see it as kind of a dichotomy, but rather can actually have a healthy union. And at the time, this was about almost 4 years ago now, they had a various set of strategic priorities. Amongst them was Islam and society. And so they were just interested basically in the role of Islam in the humanities, social sciences writ large. Our particular project, as you've heard of, and I won't repeat, kind of dove in at the administration and governance level, right? And so firstly, we'd like to thank the Templeton Foundation for kind of recognizing the uphill battle that is Islam and I think academia. And it really gave us, I think, a unique opportunity, especially given the more recent trends in America, of being able to have a good amount of funding to pursue such things. In particular, I should say, before moving on, we'd like to thank Rashid Dar, who was our program officer initially and for about halfway through the grant. Then I'd like to thank our host for the project, which is, of course, UCL IIPP. I still remember, so when I first, even before arriving here, one of the first pieces of scholarly publication I read out of IPP was a policy paper. I think it was one of the first ones 6 or 7 years ago, and it was called Getting Serious About Value, or Getting Serious About Public Value. And so the takeaway I had there was that IPP essentially is concerned about not the dominant kind of narrative in economics, which is to say that there's only the things that have a price have value, right? This is more or less what the article was talking about. And of course, therefore, if we're not following the dominant economic logic in governance, administration, et cetera, we can perhaps understand value to be much more than that, things that don't have a price, or right? So the best determiner in such a logic is markets, but what IPP was trying to do, and I think still is trying to do and doing a very good job at, is shifting the focus from markets to actual outcomes, right? And specifically social outcomes. So as we've already started to talk about, in the majority world, in other words, in the world outside of Europe and the US, et cetera, there's many factors that kind of determine what societal outcomes should be. Amongst them are faith traditions, right, or sacred traditions, broadly speaking. And so in that way, I think the IPV project, Islamic Public Value Project, had a natural home at IIPP. And I'd finally like to just extend my gratitude to both my co-editors and mentors in a real way, Rainer and Wolfgang. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Salah. So now we want to move on to a bit of a, let's say, greetings from the editor of the series, because a lot of the books that come out in academic world, of course, are part of a larger intellectual enterprise, if you will, and so it's and our book has come out in a series which is called Policy, Administrative and Institutional Change, and the series editor is the wonderful Eduardo Ongaro, professor at the. Yes, but you have to use the microphone as well. So it's just. Yes, and you have to use this microphone. And just by way of introduction, I also want to mention that Eduardo is a wonderful scholar in his own right in terms of looking at the much broader discussions around public administration. So if you want to think about humanities and public administration, religion and public administration, he has edited and written books on this topic as well. And so go online, get them today for our next weekend, not this weekend. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Rainer. Thank you very much indeed. Actually, I'm very grateful for being invited to be part of this project, to be member of the advisory board. It was absolutely a fantastic experience. Also to contribute a small chapter together with Michele Tantardini. I think Michele, if he could manage, is connected right now. That was really a great honor, and learning from you all about this project. So what I want to say is that this book is a major contribution indeed. I have to put and yet now, and yet everything is part of something bigger. And I would actually love to say that this book, this entire project, of course, and the book right now is part of not just one bigger thing, but two bigger things. It's a brick, or maybe better, it's a cornerstone of not just one, but two edifices or buildings, and I think both are very important. The first building or edifice has already been mentioned, and I wish to thank, of course, also Elgar for being here, and Nina Booth. It's part of the series, Rainer just mentioned it, the Elgar series. We now have 7 volumes and counting, so it's absolutely great to see this building accumulation, but also in a critical way, not just within the same paradigm of knowledge as part of that. So thank you very much indeed to the publisher for hosting this, and it was absolutely our honor, together with co-series editor Professor Giliberto Capano, to host your fantastic book and incredible contribution into the series. And the second big edifice, it's something that actually has changed even nature, has really taken shape thanks to this book. Because I think that before this book, and here I don't want to understate the contribution that Wolfgang, that Salah, you made before, but we had a few interconnected research agendas. Scholars, individual scholars, or maybe working in, co-authoring 2 or 3. Myself, I've been working with Michele Tantardini a lot. Believing that this topic, you perfectly said, the editors perfectly said just now, it's contributing to public administration, bringing religion into it. So religion and public administration. This was kind of the research agenda of a few individuals very sensitive to this. Also Professor Andrew Massi here, very sensitive, and of course the speaker will now tell for themselves. But thanks to this book, what actually we envisaged in another book also by Elgar, Religion and Public Administration, was to really substantiate a collective research program. A collective research program. We mentioned Salah, Sam, is the future of this collective research program, but being collective, all of us and beyond are the future of this research program. Because religion and politics have been connected, yes, already quite a lot in the scientific scholarly literature, but religion and public administration much less so. So I think this is what really this book can be about. And actually, in our small contribution with Michele Tantardini, we had the privilege of writing one of the concluding chapters, having a look at all the case studies that are in the book, and we started to see how they map into different topics and themes of this collective research program. So this is really right now taking shape. So the only final point to conclude my intervention is with what approach ethics, if you like, should we do? Should we undertake collectively this research program? I think we should combine an ethics of conviction with an ethics of responsibility. Because we are all aware, maybe this wasn't mentioned right now, but we're all aware that religion, in inverted commas now, definitions are in the book, of course, is a little bit of inflammable, explosive material. We want a scholarly endeavor which really provides knowledge, understanding, respect for faith, believers and non-believers alike, in all this, based on our convictions, but also based on assessing the impact of what we do. So an ethics of responsibility. I'm oversimplifying in front of prominent experts here, including of Max Weber. So, but you get the gist. In this way, this brick, maybe cornerstone, might be just a break in an edifice, but definitely it's going to fill a gaping hole. Thank you very much to the editors and all the contributors, and of course those who enabled this, the publisher, the foundation, and so on and so forth, for making this possible. And of course, thank you very much for having had the real sheer pleasure of being a part of this fantastic endeavor together with you. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. And now we are moving to the next phase of the book launch. As you will see, people next to me have magically changed online. You can see the people in the room, of course, saw the mechanics happening. But yeah, I wanted to sort of to echo what Eduardo and Wolfgang and Salah have been saying, that this book, while it has lots of case studies, it also has quite a lot of theorizing around not only about the public administration in the changing world, as it were, but also how do you study something like religion and PA. So it's a lot about case study, methodology, how do you do this kind of more what's called positive public administration, looking for what works in the world rather than looking for what doesn't work. And I think that's particularly maybe telling in the world of development studies, where we very often focus on the failures. And even, of course, today, if you look at the headlines of the newspapers, we also very much focus on why, as a wonderful book is called, Why Nothing Works. So there's for your June reading. This was a reference. So now we have a wonderful panel to discuss, as I said, very positively in the general vibe of the book, to look at the positive public administration, but actually to give their reflections and comments on that and thoughts in them, not only on the book, but of course on the field of study in general. So on the left of me, I have for the pleasure of Karen Johnston, who was a professor at University of Portsmouth, and very much focusing on the issues of gender and representation in public administration, which is, of course, particularly perhaps in the field of Islamic public value, an interesting question unto itself. And the far end of the panel has Karen, not Karen, so very similar sounding names, but not on purpose. Kerem Coban from SOAS, of course, and perhaps more on the from a development studies perspective to discuss the book. Another, obviously, a very important aspect. So each of you have 10 minutes, give or take, very much take, I think. We start with you, Karen.
Well, thank you very much for this kind invitation to be a discussant for this interesting addition to public administration scholarship. The book is a welcome addition to public administration scholarship and to practitioner communities, because it offers valuable insights into different types of governance models. So why a welcome addition? It challenges existing or dominant Western public administration paradigms and better practice models, as the introduction claims, and the book does just this. So how does it do this? How does it make a contribution? Firstly, I am challenged to think of what are Western models of public administration, as Wolfgang just mentioned. Because as part 1 and part 2 demonstrate, there's been a spread, perhaps an isomorphic spread, of Islamic public administration and Islamic public value, or as the book calls, touch points between Islamic and non-Islamic public administration. So Islamic public administration has not necessarily been confined to non-Western countries. Perhaps the challenge is to think beyond Anglo-Saxon governance models and what constitutes better practices in public administration. Secondly, the book makes a valuable contribution because I'm challenged to think, is Islamic public value and Islamic public administration different from Western models, or does it map onto Western models? I would argue neither, because to make this assumption that Islamic public administration is different or maps onto Western models would assume once again that the dominance or eminence of Anglo-Saxon Western models of public administration and governance. Rather, what the authors have demonstrated is that Islamic public value and Islamic public administration has existed for centuries. It is the value of this book that has brought Islamic public value out of the shadows, to use Guy Peters' words. And so we can see elements of, for example, Weberianism in the legal codification of how society ought to be governed, a normative perspective, existing in some Islamic societies for centuries. We also see, for example, Islamic non-state social associations involved in the delivery of public services to communities, and in its co-governance being mainstreamed long before Western public administration scholars coined the term public governance. So, if Islamic public value is neither different nor maps onto Western Anglo-Saxon models, what is the value of Islamic public value? What can we learn from Islamic public value, and are there better practices? Reading this book, I've come to two conclusions. And the first is, the value is citizenship to community. That is giving back, having a public service ethos, a duty to others, which is perhaps articulated in one of the 5 pillars of Islam in Zakat, and being part of a community, whether through prayer or pilgrimage, also the pillars of Islam. In the West, we have lost this sense of community, and our interactions are invariably centered on individualism, perhaps an outcome of new public management performance regimes. A sense of community involvement in governance has been the focus, as of late, by many Western public administration scholars in research on co-governance, co-implementation, co-design. So many co-co-cos, it's like Coco Chanel, a fad fascination for Western public administration scholars, but has been a mainstream of Islamic public value for centuries. The second conclusion that I draw from the book is of morality. As Kalanteri 1998 argues, and as quoted in the book, and I paraphrase here in the interest of time, as a God-centered paradigm, scholars have distilled from Islam a comprehensive theory of administration that emphasizes both material and spiritual needs of society, instilling ethical behaviors and intentions in civil servants, as well as an end goal of administration to create a just society. In the West, as we have seen in the UK, there has been a number of public administration scandals, and a UK government will be introducing a Hillsborough Bill to address unethical, maladministrative, and even corrupt behaviors of public servants. But a legal framework, especially if not correctly implemented, will do nothing to reset a moral compass. Rather, it is an innate public service ethos following the principles of Islamic public administration, devotion to serve, like the hadith, the Prophet's way of life, principles of human rights and justice, equality and equity, honesty and justice, which is something that all public administrators can learn from Islamic public value. So, what is the value of Islamic public value? I would argue it is a value to a public service rather than a hollow community. And we sit in the T.S. Eliot room, and Eliot spoke of a hollowness and meaninglessness. And in conclusion, the tradition of Islamic public value is to quote the Prophet: "The most beloved people to Allah are those who are most beneficial to people." And I think this encapsulates a public service ethos. But I have some questions. I have 3 questions. I found chapter 9 on the role of women in Morocco a very interesting chapter. Could you expand upon this with regards to the role of women in Islamic public value? My second question is, what would you argue is the most important or unique contribution of this book to public administration in general? And my last question, is Islamic public value a governance model or a tradition? Thank you.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, we'll get back to your questions after Kerem's. But I think it's there's interesting, particularly perhaps from today's perspective. You know, many of us have mentioned the name of Max Weber, and of course this idea of neutrality and neutral public service. And I think you gave it a very interesting angle, that is that Islam provides the reason for that service, and of course the hollowness that we in the West might feel is something that is covered perhaps much better in more stronger religious traditions. So this is something to come back to later on, perhaps, because it's interesting. It's a mirror onto ourselves in many ways as well. So we now go to Kerem.
First of all, thanks very much for the invitation. Also, allowing for and giving this opportunity to reflect on Islamic public administration, public value. So, yeah, someone coming from Turkey originally, and then whether it is Islamic or not, this could be discussed as well, for sure. But at least, in the one of those very recent literature reviews done by one of our colleagues in Bocconi, Marlene Hugel, published in JPOT, looking at the administrative traditions literature, Marlene quotes Turkey as Islamic, although maybe have been calling it Napoleonic. So this is my methodological, ambiguity. It's a bit ambiguous in terms of methodologically speaking, whether it's Islamic or not. So apart from that, the book, I would also, also applaud, in terms of giving this and establishing this ground and for future studies. As Eduardo also mentioned, there being this like a part of this program, and especially looking at Islam and how it could, provide more insights and also, informs practitioners, not just, us as more interested in theory perhaps, but also to address societal, critical challenges all around the world. So it actually sets this ground for future research, future reflection, and also informing the practice and the governance arrangements, institutional arrangements. But first of all, ideas at the ideational level to discuss, reflect, and then turn them, materialize them in terms of policies, institutions, launching and even preserving those existing organizations, which could, also serve to our commitment, dedication to serving the society and our compatriots and the whole. And this, the challenge to Anglo-Saxon or the Bavarian idealist approach to public admin has been already, challenged in the literature. One of those is from China, for example, Yuan Ang's, regulation governance article, or her books, for example, trying to understand whether we call corruption in different contexts, but it might be something different than what we are understanding, observing as corruption, for example. So things might change once we cross borders. Even those codes, for example, co-production, co-design, co-implement, even have different meanings once we travel across France, Quebec, UK, in a recent paper, as it was covered. So this is a very ambitious initiative, first of all. It's a very ambitious one in terms of linking to different, say, religion, public administration, and those touch points, as you also mentioned. So this is ambitious, but we need more to do. So this is first of all, thanks very much for setting up this platform to, launch and new ideas, and research. And also, Confucius, Latin American, Islamic were one of those others in Guy Peters' book on administrative traditions. So, I mean, taking this one of those others and actually shedding light, putting on this under spotlight, and how it actually is not just one another, but one of those significant pillars which could influence and inform practice and theory. Islamic Public Administration, received this, appeal and this platform and this, highlight with this project. So there is more, so this is not the end, this is the beginning of more. So this also challenges the universal claim or universal understandings of what we understand by public administration, governance, and those, arrangements. Are there any alternatives? We see, yes, there are. And this book actually provides one of those, insights by taking out, as I mentioned, one of those others to make it more salient, more visible. And then also, it also looks at those non-Islamic contexts, and this is also sort of methodologically speaking, looking at those hybrids. So who is actually generating public value? Is it just the state? Is it those secular organizations? Or are those faith-based, religion-based, influenced organizations? Such as education provided in the UK by the Islamic organizations, or even in Nepal, for example. So how those different secular and religion and, say, faith-based organizations coexist, and how could we all actually make most of those and make those hybrids actually cooperate, collaborate, so that we can also address those polarization, and not just Islamophobia, but even in the more polarized societies. So how can actually everyone can bring their own competitive advantages or their own values and also operate according to their own principles, but in overall the society enjoys the fruits and benefits of everyone's efforts, service to the community through different channels, and even not at the same ideational levels perhaps or grounds, but everyone can present something valuable to the society. And such hybridity should be studied better, should be highlighted, so that we could also focus on not just negatives, such as polarization, struggles across some religious ideologies, but also focus on highlight those positives, where those hybrids come together, cooperate, collaborate, and everyone can present their own benefits and their contribution value to the society. So we also need to focus on those positives, so that we can also avoid what the Prime Minister recently mentioned, islands of foreigners. So not just as foreigners, but coexisting and contributing together to the society, which could also. So through those insights, we can build and inform practitioners. One question also coming from Turkey, where those hybrids also coexist. My central question to the book originates from an anecdote. I was in the field for an interview to interview the Secretary General of the Peak Association of Islamic Banks. In other words, we call them participation banks. Participation means, there is no interest rate involved in this business, but you participate in both profits and losses. So there is not, charge interest rate, but you, engage in the participation of the whole operation. But, it is Islamic banks, to speak from the finance jargon. I had to get into a taxi. Then the taxi driver asked where we are going. And I said, I just described the place. And then he said, oh, it's just nonsense. They're just a fraud. Because their business is based on interest rate. And then, so I mean, it's just, I mean, shadows what they are charging their customers, but I mean, it is informed because the money in the conventional market is linked to interest rates, and they're also operating with that market. So their commissions, charges, just, I mean, co-move so highly correlated with the interest rate in the market. And then when I asked this exchange to the General Secretary of the association, he said, "This is the world, what can I do?" And then I asked, is Islamic banking Islamic? So my question is Islamic public administration is Islamic? Second, if those Islamic faith-based organizations are serving through Islamic public value perspectives, I can give you another example from Turkey. In the central Anatolia, there are vakıfs. So those civil society organizations, and they are tax-free organizations. If you don't want to pay your tax to the state, say you are owning this, I mean, nice, fancy condo, you can give its ownership to the vakıf. You can rent it, etc. You just, I mean, re-up those surpluses. So what are we actually sharing with the society through tax or what? Or other means? Is it just, it just becomes an instrument for tax evasion? So which is not Islamic, probably. So is Islamic public value Islamic, actually? So is it really informed by those principles and the religion? Or, I mean, following it so secularly or say devoutly that we are actually serving to the society by being informed by and also following those principles. So we might also need to discuss what these faith-based and Islamic organizations are actually serving, and they are actually, and if whether or not they are influenced, operating through those principles, so that we can claim Islamic public value is Islamic, or is it just used as a fig leaf? On some occasions. I think, finally, those Guy Peters' case selection chapter, I really liked it, especially through our own, because one of those independent variables is, as you mentioned, interpretation, and interpretation asks from us to interpret the context, and having those mindsets, say, decolonized in terms of letting aside Anglo-Saxon or global PA models, but be able to, open to, observe, understand, make sense of the context we are operating in, and be able to observe and capture. Maybe, when I'm asking, is Islamic public value or public administration Islamic, I might be even informed by some, say, my own biases, perhaps. So even as researchers and as ordinary citizens, then when it comes to the decision makers, policy makers, so how could we also address those existing biases and be able to observe and focus on those positives? This is my question to, addressing how we could move on from those conventional understandings and how we could land on a new setting where we can actually observe, capture, and appreciate those hybridities and the role of faith-based Islamic, faith-based organizations, Islamic institutions, arrangements. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you very much both for these thoughtful and also challenging comments. So thank you very much. And now we to the orchestration of you moving off the panel and editors moving on the panel. Now the online audience also see how the sausage is made, but in terms of events. So online, there is already a couple of questions online, but keep them coming. So we'll gather them up and give it to the editors. But first of all, we'll hear your comments to the comments.
Or answers, shall we say.
Oh,
right. So thank you very much to both of you for these wonderful questions. And I think as has to answer your question, that answers one of your questions, that answers a lot of the other things as well. And that is, what would be the main contribution of the book to the general public administration discourse? I would say it hopefully is. I mean, but you all indicated that you buy this, that such a thing as Islamic public administration exists. Whether it exists well or not is another question. That it can be abused, that there is corruption, absolutely no question. One of my favorite sayings is, everyone is always corrupt. So this is the basis. But the question is, this is in all societies at all times, this is in time and space. The question is, what can I do against it? And what you learn, for instance, from non-Western PA, not only Islamic, that because people are more or less different in time and space, or there are significant parts in which they react, very contextual institutions that can mitigate the kind of corruption you have in certain contexts can be better addressed. In a society where people don't care about their family, if you go to the corruption by shaming the family, will not work, because people say, I don't care about my grandmother. If I put her off in an old age pension home, this is not a problem, you know, this is not my issue. Whereas in heavily family-oriented areas, you can very well go via the family. This is the Confucian model, of course. So I do think that the existence of institutions that actually work, never mind how much. This is the important thing to make, because one really, I would say, should recognize that in the public administration literature and discourse, this was not clear before. So people would dismiss and say, this is a historical thing. This is Abdul Hamid II maybe, or Mehmet Fatih, or somebody like that. So going back. But that to say, this does work today. Can it be abused? Of course. But what is also very important, an old trick of the Western category has been to compare well-working Western institutions with badly working non-Western ones. But that's illegitimate. You need to look at the same systems. Yeah. So this is that you single out, certain well-working looking institutions in Scandinavia and compare that to something in some struggling context in the global South where it doesn't work, and then say, hey, look, the West works better. This is a problem. Now. Is it a tradition or a governance model? It's both, is the clear answer. What is very important with the Islamic thing, and here going back to Kerem, what we normally say in non-Western PA is the Prophet didn't have a theory of PA. There is only one PA institution mentioned in the Holy Quran. But it's an important one, and it's one that works extremely well, but still. But in its existence, in a given context, certain forms of government structures have crystallized out of practiced Islam in time and space, and that is what I would call a governance model, or elements of a governance model in this sense. And as far as the tradition is concerned, of course, this is not linear. There can be a tradition that then subsides and then is taken up again. If we take the Ottoman or Turkish examples, there are periods that are indeed more Napoleonic. Even in the Ottoman Empire, and then you go back to the older ones and you reinvent a tradition. I have occasionally been asked, for instance, at an Islamic university in Indonesia, couldn't you tell us some Islamic institutions that we could reintroduce? So, and I said, that is obviously not my place, right? We can't, but the interest to go back to these things and look at what the colonial Western tradition hasn't put down and out is quite strong. What is important in this context, I would say, is that the tradition is always hybrid these days. I don't know of a single place that has a pure non-Western system, neither on a local nor on a regional nor on a national system. There is always some Western element. That doesn't mean that what functions can't be radically different. Yeah? So my classic example is that everybody in the world seems to want to have the last iPhone. I myself have no idea of why that is, because I'm not an Apple person, but that seems to be the case. Yet, at a significant, and this is a story I can't now footnote you, but what one reads is that for a couple of years, one of the top 10 most downloaded apps for the iPhone was a Sharia app. Yeah? So that you want to find out with your iPhone when you can consume what. For instance, you have a very direct question and you ask the app that. So these things really can go together. And I don't see this as a conflict in any way, but I think this is the reality. What we do in this book is partially essentialize and emphasize A, the Islamic, and B, the working, but simply because this is still an uphill battle to make legitimate that such a tradition exists today and is of some relevance, not more than that. But if we manage to do that, I think in the current context, it's enough to justify a book. Thank you so much from my side. And Salah?
Yes, the very good question, I think, on specifically the Morocco chapter and then the role of women, I think, in Islamic public value, broadly speaking. So I was one of the co-authors, actually, of that chapter. And to me, it was, even during the fieldwork, just really special to kind of, as the narrative unfolded, so to speak, we discovered that a bit of, I guess, background, the particular cooperative institution we were studying are known as Zawaya, which in Morocco are associated often with what are known as Sufi paths, so kind of the more spiritual or mystical path of Islam. And each Zawiya in Morocco has its own annual festival. They differ in times of year, but it's usually that they'll visit one another when it's their turn for this festival. And in such festivals, it's not just all kind of like celebrations, which of course much of it is food, drink, etc. But it's often addressing, for example, maybe there's a road to be fixed, maybe there's certain issues within the community, so they can kind of rekindle bonds, things like this, right? Take care of the needy. So this often happens. And what's striking is that the largest such festival of any of the Zawaya in all of Morocco is the one featured in the chapter, and is one of a Zawiya that was founded by a woman. And so it's a really telling case of during her life, actually, she achieved quite, I guess, a status of repute, not because she was a scholar per se, which is often the case in the Islamic tradition, but actually just because of her generosity in the way she lived her life, and was considered a saint even in her lifetime. So I think, to your point, I think it's quite a standout case because this is now the largest festival in Morocco that tens of thousands of people attend every year, and actually not just Moroccans, but people from abroad. So I guess you could read the chapter for more, but to me, what we can pick out then, if we're thinking about women in Islamic public administration, Islamic public value, I think it's indicative of perhaps alternative ways or modalities of things like motivation, right? What's the underlying service motivation? Things like leadership, let's say, organizational leadership and structure that might not resonate with, let's say, mainstream Western forms of doing things. In fact, they might even clash with, as we saw in the chapter, it's often the case that much of the services and kind of contribution to the common good that's happening is actually purposely from the shadows, right? Leading from behind, so to speak, and kind of a certain type, let's say, or form of modesty that I think is quite different in contrast with often Western settings. So it's one of the areas that personally I think is and to Kerem's point, this is just the start. I think is particularly interesting line of research, but that chapter I think gives us hints towards what that specific role in an Islamic tradition is and ought to be, let's say, normatively. So, thank you.
Good. Thank you. I don't know whether Karen, Kerem, you want to follow up, or you can think about that. So now we have the opportunity for the audience, people in the room. There is already a few questions online, but I thought we can start if there is a question or two in the room before we throw it to the online audiences. Anybody? If you show your hand and show it here, we'll come with a microphone. Unless 3, 2, there you go. In the middle, gentleman. Sam, actual Sam.
The real Sam.
Wow, the real Sam. Will you stand up?
Sam. Actually, I'm a Michael, but never mind. Not St. Michael in this context, but just on Weber, I mean, to respond to Wolfgang's point. I mean, Weber wasn't terribly expert on Islam. I mean, the sources weren't terribly. He did say one or two controversial things. He basically said, well, Allah gives commandments. He's all-powerful. And his subjects, or, the believers, have to follow the commandments. And they do this. And what Weber concentrated on in religion was the practice. It's not the faith, it's the practice that creates the faith, which is a kind of, is a well-known sociological position that you talk about enablement or embeddedness. Yeah. Well, he saw that in Islam. Now, my question is, that's just a passing comment on Max Weber. What happens, I mean, is there a chapter in the book on Turkish modernization and public administration? Because there's a Turkish Weber thesis that Turkey would modernize by trying to get the values and dedication that Weber saw in vocationalism, which becomes professionalism, which in the original Weber thesis actually had a religious origin in Puritanism. So can you have an Islamic everyday practice which is not so much Puritan but observant, and in that sense it creates common values which then feed into the public administration? But just going back to the Turkish, it's a modernization thesis, which means that it was heading towards secularization. That seems to be a problem, as I see it, but I'm not up on it.
No, great, thank you. I think maybe that sort of chimes well with the question from online, which is kind of like this question around value, public value and values, which I think during the project we had some issues, and I think Sam's question was also in that direction in some ways, and also the Kerem's question around Islamic public value, Islamic. So maybe you want to talk about that, or?
But do you then want to read out the question?
Oh yeah, you can.
People don't know it.
Well, I thought I summarized it, but.
Oh, did you?
The middle one there.
Okay, and the last one is again a Salah question. Yeah, is it really Islamic? And this kind of thing. So one of the, and I would never accuse Kerem of that, but one of the great delegitimization strategies against all non-Western PA is to look at similar institutions elsewhere and to say, this is not really what it is because we also find it in another culture. Now, not to go as far as Yen Yan Ang and saying all people are the same in principle in what they want. I would definitely not say that. That changes over time. But the Conditio Humana does suggest similar answers in similar ways. But as Weber, for instance, said, the Confucian public administration in the Confucian chapter, in the religion book, Confucian PA chapter, looks like Prussian PA, but if you go into it, what motivates it is radically different. So that you have very, very often. But I would actually flip the question. This is a typical thing from the non-Western PA. If in the UN, it comes from a UN paper where it was said, why should we say something is argued by the Caliph Omar if it was argued by Woodrow Wilson already. It's much better to say it was Woodrow Wilson who said it. Whereas I would say there are a lot of people by now who think what Woodrow Wilson said is not necessarily a positive thing, you know. So he has gotten a lot of critique recently for various background things. And there are audiences who actually would prefer the same point being made by the Caliph Omar, which in a very large part of the world is more legitimate. So in other words, there may be parallelities, but I think that if it fits a certain context, if it emerged during the time, homologies, as we say in biology, is something that you find, but it doesn't mean it's the same. And in context, to preserve what there is very important. One of the things that I wouldn't say motivates an academic, but a typical example which I found very striking is that I gave a lecture in a non-primarily Islamic country in Southeast Asia. And after that, I got a present from the Islamic Student Society, a cup, actually a teacup with a decoration. And it was very nice. And I said, why? And they said, well, because in this lecture that you gave on Islamic PA, this is the first time in our entire studies that we heard that the Islamic tradition in PA is not something negative, that it doesn't keep people back, that it is not evil and draws everything down, but that there is a positive tradition here that can produce things. So this is what we are partially still up against. So if there is a possibility to call something positively Islamic and that it sometimes works, that is something in the uphill battle that our world has right now that I think would be worth making, even, I mean that just now on a heuristic intellectual level. So if something is the same, let's say it's interesting that by its own right, Islam produced this as well. Very briefly to Sam's point on the Turkey thing, we do have a very good Ottoman chapter in the history part of the book that is talking about these things. It's highly political in Turkey today of whether you like vakıfs or you don't. Yeah, this is a party political point almost, and it has changed during the times of what you emphasize. I mean, there's a very famous Turkish-American scholar who thinks that inalienable hospital endowments are a bad thing because they eat up the money and don't make it flexible. On the other hand, at times when governments take the money away from hospitals and have absolutely no problem with people dying on the street, it makes inalienable hospital endowments look pretty good. So both the traditions change and the contexts in which the traditions change. But what we had in, and again, you correct me if I'm wrong, but what I see in Turkey is a non-linear change of modernization and we can say demodernization with a purpose. Yeah? So in a way, part of Hamidism, the changes under the Sultan Abdülhamid, is a reaction against what he perceived and the people around him as a failure of modernization, that this only had traction in the big cities. But if you want to take the country along, you might want to take other paradigms back in order to have something against the hostile influx, especially from France and the other country I could mention but won't because we are in it. Yeah, so this is the story here. So it depends on what point in the development you look. This would be what I'm saying. And yeah.
Shall I answer the online?
Go ahead. Yeah. Do you remember it?
Yes, I remember it briefly. It's just basically that that in fact mentioning the Caliph Omar, that oftentimes his period of reign in the early period of Islam is considered to be, I guess, the most formative. Let's say. So on that. Indeed, that's the point where Islam kind of emerged out of the Arabian Peninsula, immediately up north in places such as Damascus, the Holy Land, etc. And I think what's interesting about that, and oftentimes, we've talked about way back in Tallinn very often, is that the emergent story of the Islamic civilization, let's say, and really the formation period of its administration was such that when you have at most 100,000 initial Muslims, and even that's like on the generous end, and you're expanding large swaths of territory, you can't just, contrary to narratives, let's say, you can't just go and just kill everybody, right? It just wouldn't work. You can't administer. Rather, what you do is you take on the local structures that do exist, and much of it will be aligned with Islam as such. That isn't, you demand certain loyalties around, right? But the point is that you keep what is there and kind of work with it and shape it. And a point about that is actually Damascus in particular took over 2 centuries to become majority Muslim. That is like over 50% Muslim, right? And historians still to this day, and there's decades actually old studies on this, that the Abbasid Caliphate in all its time never became majority Muslim across the Caliphate. It never actually reached that status. So indeed, I think that the period of and of course, I mean, especially now, I'll finish with this. One of the anecdotes about the Caliph Omar that is quite striking is that when he came to Jerusalem, when the Muslims kind of were victorious in battle, he had heard that previous with the Crusaders and everything that that the Jews were kicked out, and so he brought back Jews to kind of reinstall them into Jerusalem. So it's quite, given the circumstances now, I think a story we shouldn't forget.
Thank you so much. There's one more question in the audience. Yes,
Hi.
go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, I'm trained as an architect from India, and I was just curious what indigenous would mean in a Islamic context. And while doing the research, how would you identify? Well, this is indigenous, this is not.
Great, and let's do one more question in front of you. Just gentlemen. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Imam. I'm student at IPP. So my question related to the IPP itself. So what would be like the best correlation between this Islamic PA and also the idea of rethinking of the state on how, for example, Islamic PA can actually see the role of state approaching the market, for example, not only in terms of redistribution of welfare, but in terms of the creation of wealth on productive economies, and also maybe some sort of insight and initial funding in the case of how Islam can see actually what capacity and what capabilities that state and this public organization need to have, aside from those, characteristic of leadership and Siddiq, Amanah, Fatona, Tabligh. Is there any like specific initial finding on what capacities and capabilities the state need to really have from the Islamic PA perspective?
Thank you. A very IIPP question. Yes. And so, floor over to you for.
Yeah, so I'll take the first one on indigeneity. So yeah, this is something actually early on that we had discussed much amongst ourselves and others. I think it's actually just a quick anecdote. We were even thinking about what does indigenous mean here in the UK when you have, I don't know, is it the 12th generation now of people from the subcontinent, India, et cetera, that, and so at what point do you draw the line, so to speak? But broadly speaking, I think the way we saw it was Islam takes basically, there's flavors of Islam, right? Spheres of Islam. And we tried to cover, by the way, in our case selection, we tried to cover kind of the major ones. There's classically 5 or 6. And I think that what's important to reflect is that when we talk about Islamic public administration, it's not just a kind of a ceremonial recreation of what happened in the Arabian Peninsula during the Prophet's time or the early caliphs, etc. But rather, I think, as I was kind of touching on as well, that Islam kind of takes on what's local, right? And in that regard, I think we kind of piggybacked on indigenous institutions. I'll speak about Morocco, which is the chapter I co-authored. There, it's the Amazigh people who have been there predating Islam by millennia, and now have kind of formed things like Zawaya, various other institutions actually, which is interesting for future research. But yeah, that if you want a heuristic, I would say something that's older than our great-grandparents, so that we could rule out the NGOs, if you will, in a lot of these countries, and something that is kind of rooted in some type of local tradition. And so we took that point of view, if you will.
Go ahead.
Yeah, let me add to that. I have been queasy about that term, and whatever term you use for this is the other thing. But there is also such a matter as discourse. Welcoming Dechen from Bhutan, which has the big debate about happiness. A lot of people are then saying, yeah, but happiness to me means something totally else. But there is a scholarly discourse globally on happiness and happiness orientation and policy, and it means something there. And indigenous in general, in the non-Western context, what it means is cultures that were already there before the onset of Western colonialism. The people who have been the most upset about using indigenous have been Australians, because they are very clear on what they think indigenous means, and they think they have a reservation to this label for their context. But in this context, as I said, it's what was there already. The indigenous label is invariably political, because we have very important political movements that claim that they are the ones who own the country because they were there before X. Yeah? And of course, in the case of Islam in South and Southeast Asia, we have that a lot. Yeah? That people say, we were here before, and then came they, and so they're exactly not indigenous. But once you have this government and then the Brits come, they are still indigenous to this kind of tradition, right? So it's always the previous layer, and the main thing we are arguing towards in PA is the Anglo-American mainstream or other colonial mainstream. So perhaps that illustrates a little bit. Is it the perfect label? No. But in the end, you have to settle for something to give some sort of signal. Now, what you say about capabilities and capacities, yes. This reminds me of the book launch of another book launch which we share, but not Salah, and which is now out in Indonesian since a month on innovation bureaucracy. This, I think, would be a follow-up to what we are doing. So indeed, again, as I said, this book has more theory than we originally planned. We originally planned on putting the case studies in, but the building on what a general, some of the more, problematic editors of journals when we were in this project always said, yeah, but couldn't you provide us a list with Western and Islamic? And our point was always, no, we can't. We are not there yet at that point. It's illegitimate to do this. And anyway, this kind of juxtaposition of lists and starting with the Western ones, that is just so Western, But the first problem is, can Islamic governance of any way, while we have general principles, Shura being a very general one. You can't have Islamic PA without Shura. You need to go through this council of people who know. Yeah? But on the other hand, the real thing emerges once you have the governance principles in time and space. That means then it's important to look at the actual government you're talking about, where this is, how it behaves, and what challenges it faces. It can't be more than that, I think. So this kind of answer I would only give in context, at least in a certain area, at a certain time, and building on what we've been trying to do, not yet contained in it. Thanks.
Great. We have one more question in the audience to Tamsin back there, but it's just to follow up on the capacities and the Islam question. I think that in a way you can find the answer obviously in Weber as well, because he essentially told us that capitalism needs a direction. Otherwise it just becomes highway robbery. And as we see now in the US, so he wrote about Protestant ethics and capitalism. If you look at East Asia's success, it has a lot to do with Confucianism. So the way to think about it is, can you see Islam in the similar context of providing a national project and a direction, essentially? And that would be the question I would ask, and but not answer, obviously. And there is Tamsin over there, and I have a very strict script here, so I have to follow that we have 7 more minutes before
this is very quick. It's a practical. I'm from IIPP. Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to reading it. I'm very excited it's open access. And I wondered, on a practical sense, but also picking up on what you've been talking about, can you tell us a little bit about the contributors? How difficult it was to find contributors, what their geographical balance was? Are people writing from an Islamic perspective? Thank you.
Great question. Salah, go ahead.
Yeah. So at the risk of like forgetting someone on the spot now, I won't mention all the contributors, but so in terms of historical case studies, I'll start with that. We have 3 scholars that we covered. The Ottoman Empire, Central Asia, and then Andalusia, like Islamic Spain. And then we have 14 contemporary case studies. And these are like all literally scattered from, I guess, the westernmost point, Morocco, the easternmost point, the Philippines, and kind of all throughout. And some cases are Muslim majority contexts. Some of them are where Muslims are the minority, actually. Sometimes a minority within a minority, which Shobit knows of and wrote about in his chapter. So one policy we had, of course, introducing these institutions to the literature, we had to do field work, which was a big part of this project overall, right? So one of the things that I guess drove our selection criteria was always to work with a local scholar or somebody who might not be based locally but is like from there originally, because obviously beyond just language, but being able to kind of undertake the research we were also heavily influenced by kind of Linda Tavai Smith and kind of decolonizing methodologies, etc. So we wanted to go about research that way. And it was just a real privilege. There's also the theory papers, many of which were written actually by, I think this was alluded to, members of the project's advisory board, who in the course of the various conferences, get-togethers, they were really interested in actually, were like, can I write about this and reflect on it? So we had that not only in this book, but also other publications in the project. That's to give, like I said, I don't want to leave anybody out, but that's a bit of an overview of who the authors were.
Yep, go ahead.
And just very quickly, this gives me the following chance. Although maybe it's a bit strange in a book launch like this, but so this comes from a project, the IPV project, Islamic Public Value, and this is our main publication, but not the only one. So we have actually a book from the faith perspective that Salah edited and that just came out. So this is separate from real imams looking at that and looking at it from the Islamic theological perspective. But we will have 3 journal issues, out of which one specifically targets Southeast Asia. All of that with empirical fieldwork, partially not done before, such as Islam in Cambodia or places like that, and with 3 case studies from Indonesia, which is the biggest Islamic country, as you know, and so on and so on. And then an issue in public administration and development that is open for people outside of the project. So this book, as polyglot in a way as it is not all of this, but we did try to mirror the reality of lived Islam everywhere by representatives of these places, to the extent that we could.
Excellent. So after you have read this book, there's much more to look forward to. We have 2 quick questions.
Hello, I'm Arne Flotan, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. This is more sort of a question of clarity and trying to get understanding. I really liked your question, sorry, I can't remember your name, on tradition versus governance. From a reform perspective, where does one start? Because if it's governance, then recreate principles, hope for the best. If it's tradition, you can't really do that in one election cycle. So where do we begin from a reform perspective with this? Maybe it's a bit premature, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on where to start with that.
Good, and that's good. Thank you, and Kerem as well, and then that's it. Salah, maybe you can give...
Sorry. Here you go.
There.
It's just a follow-up on capacity capabilities. So first is horizontal. Horizontal meaning it was one of those occasions. I mean, I was through Skype. I mean, I was interviewing as part of my assignments during my masters, connecting to interviewing those in a temple in Sri Lanka, providing soft skills training, especially after the, let's say, post-conflict setting. So it is actually complementing state's function, providing those soft skills training at the grassroots. So as we observe also similar organizations and institutions in the Islamic world, do you see any, say, cross-organizational, say, cross-faiths, religions, like points or, say, knowledge, know-how that could also inform each other's, views, perspectives? The other is also about bureaucracy. So how could these organizations complement as the hospitals, so once the state fails, as it happened in the earthquakes in Turkey, it was the community that take care of itself, while the state is just trying to respond to those crises. And in most of those emergencies, it is the society, those organizations come to the front, complement state's capacities. So how could these Islamic organizations complement state capacity to provide those values too?
Thank you very much, Salah and Wolfgang. Last round.
Okay. If reform means going back or going away from the Western model, if this is what you mean, rather than a kind of Whig progressive interpretation of history.
Not the UK version of reform, yes.
Exactly. Then you work with what you have. That means you look at what is there to take off from. Yeah? Whether this is a tradition or an institution is not really the question here, but in my opinion, if we're talking about governance, if you can work with an organization, it's quicker than with a tradition that you need to harness first. And to Kerem, of course, what we have a couple of really classic cases there in which these, or let me put it like that, when Islamic organizations that look society-like take over state functions because what is usually defined as the state completely collapses, the question is who is the state here? And if you have the mahallas in Uzbekistan, of which we have an excellent case study by Rustam Urenboyev, in which even the gas supply in the villages is done by a council of an imam, a traditional mayor, and the school teacher, the question is whether that's not the state. And not the Uzbek government that doesn't even get into the Fergana Valley to provide anything. So, and I would here with Guy Peter say that this is the state. Yeah? And this is very important to say. What we do see as a general, here I'll go out of a limb, as a general thing, not only but certainly in Islam, is that when the classic 19th century state fails, old Islamic institutions come back, re-emerge, take over, and provide the structure of life for the people that they need to live a normal, meaningful life. And they fail every day. Sometimes. Oh, yeah.
Wonderful. Salah, did you want to say something? Or no, it's good. But anyway, actually...
You've seen the mahalas more than me, but since you gave it to me.
But that is the final section of our presentation is actually the final words by you, Salah, which actually chimes very well with the question we have from online. What's next for the project? So you can talk about the next steps.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, actually that's perfect outro, because that's, I guess, yeah, the one concrete thing, there's many to come, of course. But there's something called IPVNet, or Islamic Public Value Network, which is going to be an academic and policy network. There's 5 founding members. So the HBKU, Hamad bin Khalifa University in Qatar, Universitas Indonesia, Department of Public Administration in Indonesia, of course, the National Institute for Development and Administration, which is NIDA, their Graduate School of Public Administration, UCL IIPP, of course, and finally the kind of HQ for at least the first 5 years, Taltech Ragnar Nurkse Department. And so, yeah, we'll have various kind of theme-focused workshops rotating across the founding members. We'll be facilitating scholarly works. Actually, one is up on deck, and with Elgar again, which is going to be a handbook on Islamic Public Administration. And yeah, we expect to have our first meeting of IPVNet in 2026, spring of 2026. So you can stay tuned there.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I can only close with a final comment from online. Somebody has said, thank you for the book launch, quite amazing, sounds like music to my ears. So hopefully it's been wonderful all around, everybody online. So I want to thank, obviously, my co-editors, Wolfgang and Salah, of course, also Shobit, man of the background here. Thank you very much for all the organization.
No book launch without Soviet.
Yeah, yes. And also everybody online, thank you very much. Also the IIPP comms team, people in the audience here. Eduardo, Karen, thank you very much. And of course, everybody physically here, we can move to the next room where there's a bit of refreshments. You can buy the book and discuss with the authors as you wish. And people online, go and download and read. Thank you very much for coming. Thanks. Bye-bye.